First, just a very quick thing on why we do this, why Kim and I welcome you all into our home and welcome RAN here and tell you about the awesome things they do. And that is just because they get stuff done. You know, there are a lot of causes, a lot of environmental causes. You can give money and they do public relations, or they do lobbying, or they do education, whatever, a lot of great things. But with RAN, you know, you give them support, and then they come back a year later, and they come back 2 years later, and they go, look what we did, and look what an amazing impact. And they, you know, in a short period of time with a small budget, they change the world. They make a huge impact. And that's what it's really all about. It's measurable results.
Thank you, Andy, very much.
Without further ado.
Thank you to you and Kim for hosting again, generously opening up your homes. And I also just wanted to give a little context. I've known RAN since their founding, really. And it's one of those organizations. I was in Washington, D.C. for 15 years, and we work with a lot of different environmental groups around the world focused on domestic issues, international issues. And the reason why I've been working with RAN the last few years and helping them come here to Sun Valley is because as far as bang for your buck for impact, they're incredibly impactful. And they're also an incredibly committed, dedicated, hardworking group of people, and I'm really proud to have you guys in town. And so with that, I would love to introduce Lindsey, because a lot of their impact has been thanks to Lindsey, who before she became executive director was their programs director. And so she's really helped to oversee a lot of their wins, which we're going to be talking about tonight. So thank you for joining us. And then I also wanted to include and introduce Kaitlyn Farrington, the incredible 2014. Where's the medal? She has the medal.
Oh, I do have it.
Yeah. So she
Yeah,
has
there's a
it.
little baby out there. It's here.
And I had to do a little research, but she was the first woman rider to perform a backside 1080 in the world.
Oh!
I'm a Nordic girl, so I had no idea what that is. But it's basically you walk turning backward, and you go 3 full rotations.
Yeah.
So that's amazing. Through the air, flying incredibly slow. Thank you. Welcome, Kaitlyn and Lindsey. Thank you for joining us. So we wanted to talk a little bit about global issues and what RAN's been doing around the world to make a difference, and then we want to talk about local issues and local impacts and how we're making a difference. So first, let's start with the title of this. We talked about radical is reasonable. Why do you guys think radical is reasonable, given where we are with the state of the climate, with the issues that we're confronting in the environmental arena? Why is radical reasonable, and what do you guys do that's radical?
Sure.
So I'll start with Lindsey.
Okay, I'll start. So thanks again, everyone, for coming. In terms of radical being reasonable, I think it's about changing our expectations and changing our understanding to catch up with the reality of what we're facing. So at a time when we're seeing the level of climate change that we're seeing, we need to adjust what we're doing in order to meet that very, very large global goal. And that's why I think some of our preconceptions about radical need to start to shift, and we need to understand that the action that we're taking is reasonable and it is in line with the change that we need to see to stabilize the global climate. And there's one story that sticks out for me, which is, you know, we moved Wall Street to stop funding fossil fuel extraction and the burning of fossil fuels. And so we negotiate with a bunch of big banks, all of the names that you would recognize. And one of the first negotiations, because I had worked primarily on the forest side of our work, we got into a negotiation right after I became executive director about 2.5 years ago, and went into the negotiations with one of the VPs of a very large, one of the largest banks. And we started the conversation by saying, let's all assume that we're here to stabilize the climate. And that is the starting place for this conversation. So if we're assuming that, what in particular makes that meaningful to you? Why are you doing it individually? And this was already significant because this bank was a climate denial bank not too long ago. And it was a bank that at one point, I'm kind of giving away who I'm talking about a bit, but it was at a certain point the largest funder of the coal industry. And they wanted to remain the largest funders of the coal industry. So they were the ATM for the coal industry. And we had this conversation where we went around and each person had a personal story. And for most folks in the room, it was about, for me, it was my nephew. I have a 2-year-old nephew. He was just on the way at that time. And for the woman sitting across from me from Bank of America, it was about her son, and she has a teenage son. So while what we needed to talk about was completely reasonable in terms of the change that we need to see to stabilize the climate, it might have been something, had we not started from that position, that seemed radical because we have pre-existing notions that say you're asking for too much or you're trying to move too quickly. And so part of what we do at RAN is we break down that assumption and say, we call it taking people to the forest or starting in the forest. So instead of starting in a boardroom when we're working to move some of the practices of these companies and talking about the incremental changes that they want to make based on the reality of the boardroom, we go to the forest. We talk about stabilizing the climate, and that's where the conversation starts. And that's where what we're asking them to do all of a sudden starts to sound very reasonable.
Great, thank you.
Well, I mean, for me, I'm in the snow industry, obviously. And as for the past couple of years, we've seen our climates change and less snow each year. And for me, a snowboard halfpipe, and it's been insane because the number of 22-foot halfpipes that are now in the U.S. have really dwindled. There's maybe, I think, 4 total that are pipes that we go and train at. And at one point, it was every resort in the U.S. had a 22-foot pipe cutter, Zog, and every resort was trying to get these 22-foot pipes up everywhere because that was what was in demand for going to the Olympics and doing what I do. And all of a sudden, it changed so fast within 4 years. I feel like it really, people were like, it's not worth it. It's not worth us putting all this snowmaking money into this to have these pipes because not a lot of people are still going up to the mountains every day to go ride these half pipes because it's warm outside all the time and we're not getting the snow that we've once got before. And so I feel like for me, I started working with POW about 3 years ago, and it was kind of something that as a child and growing up, I never really paid attention to this climate change or anything like that. But all of a sudden it became really important to me because it's affecting my job and everything that I've been doing for the past 10 years. And so that's kind of the reason that I've taken on to come on tonight as well, is because it is important. And when I was in high school, I mean, I wasn't paying any attention to climate change or any of that. But once I left and once I started experiencing the world outside, I realized that this is something that's really important and it has affected me and my job and what I do because I moved to Salt Lake City because we didn't have a 22-foot pipe in Sun Valley. And so I moved to Salt Lake City and I was there. Then all of a sudden in Salt Lake, they can't even get their pipes up until the middle of January because it's too warm there and they just can't produce the snow. And so I end up in Colorado for about 2 months of every year. And it's just one of those things that we're chasing snow now. And it's not like we're going to all these resort towns where we've always been going. Now we're chasing it. And it's just making it difficult. We see it in all of our contests. When I was trying to qualify for the Olympics last year, we had this point where we had a contest in California. And they're like, no, we can't do this. We don't have any snow. We're pushing everything we've got to get a half pipe and the jump so you guys can have your qualifier. And they just ended up canceling that entire event in Tahoe and moved it to Colorado and kept us in Colorado for another month. And it's just one of those things that we're seeing it in the world that I do, snow world. We see it so much here. It was raining yesterday. It's not supposed to rain in January. No. So it's just something that is important to just, for everyone to kind of take notice and start taking it apart and actually realize that this is something that's happening around our world.
Kaitlyn, I think it's so great because I think that most athletes aren't really engaged in this issue, and you guys have such a following and so many young people who follow and admire you. And so I think it's about you, what you're doing that's radical is setting aside a significant chunk of your time to make impact and to reach out to a new community. I haven't heard it before, and you're taking risks because some people might not buy it or it might be a hard conversation to have. And so it's a radical move, but it's one that's necessary, and that's why I think it's reasonable. And people, as they start to see it, I think we start to see that they're saying, yeah, I am seeing changes. We need to do something if we can. Well, I wanted to ask Lindsey a little bit more about RAN because RAN, you guys do take on David versus Goliath battles, and I think some of this addressing climate change feels like David versus Goliath. You've got a lot of major financial players, corporate players around the world who have a lot of vested interests in continuing to cause deforestation and to continue to produce fossil fuel generated electricity. So can you just tell us a couple examples of how you guys work? Because I think it's interesting that you both catalyze to get them at the table and then you actually work with them at the table. So can you talk to us just a couple examples?
Yeah. So the way that we think about it is we follow the money, we follow the commodity, we follow wherever something is touching down and feeding back into where an individual can take action. And then we want to leverage that as much as possible. So that's the whole theory behind it. In the case of banks, which I already gave, we're literally following the money. We're looking at who are these banks underwriting, what is that allowing in terms of investments. We started it with mountaintop removal. So as I'm sure, mountaintop removal coal mining. So as many of you, I'm assuming know, there's this practice where you blow the top off a mountain and then you work to extract these seams of coal. And about 10 years ago, we realized that we could get leverage to get the banks to decide not to invest any further. And that started shifting the way the entire mountaintop removal sector was operating. Because it is not long-term a good investment to put money into things that are going to destabilize the climate. And so the shorthand for it now we see it's getting a lot of traction. There's a whole divestment movement where college institutions are being pushed to pull back their investments from the fossil fuel sector because it is not a good long-term investment, right? And one of the phrases that we often use is something is going to be lost in this. So either you're making good long-term investments and you're going to have a stable future, or you're destabilizing your future by destabilizing the climate, and you're going to have financial impacts on that. The other sector that we obviously moved, and you can guess by our name, we're Rainforest Action Network. We started in tropical forests. We look at what is causing deforestation. And of course, it's not just that trees are falling, it's that we're losing entire ecosystems. When we're working in a forest like Indonesia, we have, one of the last places on Earth where you have rhinos and sun bears and orangutans and elephants all still living together in a very high density. Oftentimes we're seeing endangered species that are found nowhere else on Earth. And we're chopping down these trees, we're draining the peatlands. Peatlands become coal if you wait long enough. When you drain them, you get massive carbon spikes. And then oftentimes the commodities that are then being planted there, something like palm oil, for instance, little known additive in many of the products. Now that you know about it, look for it. You won't be shocked out when you see it. Most common vegetable oil in the world. They're raising these forests in order to plant palm plantations that you can see for miles and miles. So that's the depressing part. So then here's what we do is we say, okay, let's figure out which companies are sourcing from new expansion into forests, and let's shut down that frontier. So in the case of palm oil, about 7 years ago, we started a campaign, and we said we would like Cargill, the largest privately held company in the world, who is the middleman for taking this palm oil that's produced in Indonesia or Malaysia, and trafficking it to the global market, distributing it around the world. They're one of the largest agribusiness traders in the world. We said, let's see if Cargill will say, we will not buy and trade palm oil that is coming, that's conflict palm oil, that has all of these problems associated with it. And this was actually the campaign that brought me to RAN, because I wanted to be the campaign director for this campaign. And I said, okay, so you're taking on one of the largest privately held companies in the world. You don't have shareholder leverage. It's not a brand that everybody recognizes. And what's your ask? And the ask was, use your experience, try to shift the way that you're purchasing palm oil in Indonesia so that it changes, it creates an incentive for the companies that would be cutting forests not to cut forests. Let's see if you can do that. And then, not only do we want you to do that, which it's a booming market, it's very profitable, it's a big challenge for many reasons, but we want you to, once you succeed at doing that, apply that and make it your global model. So that anywhere in the world where you are, underwriting and supporting and creating the market for deforestation, we want you to cut off that valve and say we won't trade it so that the companies can't find a market. So of course, the first negotiation I came to at RAN, it was like, very nice to meet you, interesting to hear your crazy idea, please don't call us again. And we continued, and what we did is we said, who are the companies that matter to Cargill? Because we as one individual might not be able to change Cargill's mind, although sometimes we try, but it's not always successful. So when we can, we say, who are the companies they're buying from? And last year and a half ago now, we decided to tighten the screw a little bit on Cargill, and we launched a campaign on the Snack Food 20. So these are 20 major global snack food companies, many of whom care about their brand and care about individuals with leverage. So an example was Mars, the candy company. So you think of M&Ms. They're huge globally. They're one of Cargill's largest customers, turns out. And we had listed them in the account. So we flew to New York. We had a conversation with Mars after a number of people took action outside of grocery stores, writing in petitions, writing in letters, taking action online, doing events locally to show Mars we actually care whether or not you make a profit from this conflict palm oil. So then Mars agrees to a negotiation with us, and I went there we do the look each other in the eye and see how serious we are about these commitments, because sometimes there's beautiful words and not beautiful progress. And so we did the look them in the eye conversation, and one of the guys there said to me, we're a values-based company. And I said, many companies consider themselves values-based company. What do you actually mean? And what is the impact? What changes as a result of being a values-based company? And he said, if we don't see progress, then we don't continue to do business. And I said, okay, that's great, values-based company. That's the type of action we need to see. So we talked about what it would take for them to convince Cargill to start shifting. And they were one of 20. So then you can start to see how individuals who take action and organize locally, when we're being very targeted and almost surgical, can start to have a very real impact on companies that otherwise seem untouchable. And so this is a bit of a long story, but the exciting moment is it actually happened in September. So we knew that Cargill had been moving on their palm oil policy, and I went from being at a negotiation in Singapore to, I don't always fly around the world because I do know about that impact on climate. I stayed there for a while, so I had been in Indonesia and Malaysia already. So we have the negotiation in Singapore, and then go to New York for the big climate mobilization, the People's Climate March. And that coincided with the big UN convention that Ban Ki-moon had put together. And I got invited to get credentials. And so the UN process, you normally apply, and then you go through this very long, drawn-out thing. And I hadn't actually applied for credentials this year because we're really focused on a different track. And so I thought it was odd, and I thought, and I'm a very assertive activist, because when we don't see progress from companies, we stand outside the buildings, we have banners, etc. So you can imagine I have, people understand that I do that. They don't just go inviting me into the UN. And so, I didn't have to put up any fight to get in. So we get the credential, we go into the meeting, and we confirm that Cargill will be one of the first panelists speaking in the plenary about forests and their relationship with climate. And in that meeting is where the new CEO of Cargill made the commitment that not only had they adopted their zero deforestation commitment on palm oil, but they had decided to use it as a global model, and they were making a global zero deforestation commitment across all of their commodities. And then you can imagine my shock, because I was like, what did he just say? Quick, run and start making media calls. So that is the type of impact that you can see when you're very targeted, and when you have the support, like the support that we have in the room, where people decide to take action and do things differently.
I think what's so great about that is that we've seen some real momentum with other companies stepping forward as a result of this work and work by others, where you actually have across the board, you have Unilever, which is a massive conglomerate which sources they own Ben and Jerry's, and they have massive soaps, and they're all over the world, and they have made a commitment also to be a part of this net zero deforestation and sustainable to source 100% certified sustainable palm oil. There's actually a third party who can go out and certify and make sure it's not from deforestation, and you see partners in those efforts across really surprising companies, and it's thanks to this work where you create a safe space. When one moves, the others feel like it's safe to move. So you start to see that momentum. We can have success against Goliath. Yeah. So Kaitlyn, I want to ask you about young people because you have so much influence, and you yourself are a generation behind me. So I wanted to know what you're seeing from them, from your peers, but also young people who influence and interact with. And
I mean, from like in the snowboard community, I feel POW has really taken an alliance to get everybody involved, ski and snowboarding, and it's just kind of we go and we do events at schools. We go to high schools, we go to middle schools, and POW gives a presentation. They bring on a couple of athletes within POW. And we just go and talk to kids about what we can do, and it's just the small things, because I mean, like I said, when I was in high school, I didn't pay any attention to any of this, and so it was like the small things that you can do, and that's what we encourage kids to like take action, and just unplugging things from their walls, just anything that they see, encourage talking to their parents about recycling, if recycling is not in their homes, or anything like that. And then also within the community of snowboarding, we have this one girl, Chanel Sladix, and Jamie Anderson. They've created this contest, and it's the Community Cup. And it's an all-green contest, and it's just no plastics are involved in any way. And it's just, that's what they're pushing. And I feel like in the snowboard and ski industry, because we're seeing less and less snow every year, that everybody in our community is trying to get involved and take action and become part of POW, which is Protect Our Winters. And I think mostly, it's probably like 70% of the riders are part of the POW Alliance now. And you can go on protectourwinters.com and take, there's the POW 7 pledge that you take. And it's kind of just it literally says, talk to people about it, talk to local businesses, try and just get the word out there. And that's the most important about POW, is they just want the word out there. They want people to start realizing that this is something that's going on. And so that's what they've been pushing for the past, I think they've been around for about 7 years now, and they've just been really growing with it, especially in the past couple. They've just really pushed to push us onto these younger kids and go to schools and just push climate change and just bring awareness to the whole fact, because lots of people, you just don't see it that much, and you don't hear people really talking about it in cities or other places. But in the smaller communities, I feel like it's something that every small town has really embraced, this climate change, and they want to make a difference. And I think that's the most important part, because it's the small steps that get us further. And so it's just, I work with kids just trying to talk about what they can do and what you don't want to be seeing, pretty much.
I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about local, what we're doing here locally. Kaitlyn, starting with you on the local front, how can local athletes get involved with POW? They can sign up. How and have you been talking to others here? I know there's some other amazing athletes in here.
Yeah, I mean, for the local, I feel like athletes, as us as athletes, we have some of the highest impact as anybody, because people look up to us, which is weird to say, but I mean, people are looking at us and following what we're doing, and it's important to just educate people on it and kind of let people know that you're interested as an athlete, because then it kind of gives them the push. They're like, well, here's this Olympian that's talking about POW and climate change, and people will take notice, and I feel like they look into it as well, even if they're not really believing it or whatever, but they're definitely going to go and look into it and be like, okay, so what is she talking about with POW? What does Protect Our Winters do for us, and what are they trying to do for us? And I think that's the most important thing, because literally anything helps, really, and it's just small steps that really take account. And I feel that as a small community, Sun Valley, I feel everybody we've all seen our winters just dwindle a little bit here and there, and it's sad and it's hard to accept, and we just want to go ride powder and go have fun, but we can't really as much anymore. And so I feel that it's definitely had such an impact on the small communities that that's what makes people step up and start to take notice and start to help out.
Energy, clean energy, the solutions to climate change are such an opportunity for us, and so I'm really excited to have people from the industries here in the room and on this catch-up committee with me, and Billy Mann's here from Sagebrush Solar, so if anybody wants to put solar on their roof, I have to give a quick shout out. And just how important it is for us, continue to act the global players, make that strategic global intervention, but then I think always think about locally. So it's a real opportunity for us here, so I'm excited. So okay, final 2 questions from roll number 1, so we can open up for Q&A. What's next for you, and what can people do? And then we'll have a conversation with everybody. So, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't know, all of you may have heard I had to retire from competitive snowboarding because I have stenosis in my neck. And so now for me, this is one of I knew that I was going to have to come out and say this when I was approached by Rand to come up here. And so it was kind of one of those opportunities that I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And in a moment of distress, I got this call and they were like, do you want to come do this speech with Rand? And I was like, yeah, that sounds great. And it's one of those things that I was decided on it because I was like, I work with POW and I've been doing this, and it's something I've wanted to get more involved in. And now that I can't compete snowboarding, I'm on to the next chapter of my life, and I think this is going to end up taking a pretty big course and trying to get more involved with POW and places, things like RAN, I'm just on that track where I'm just trying to figure out what I want to do, and I think that was one of the most important things for me when deciding this, that I was going to retire and be done competing, was what's next and what can I do to help, and what can I also do to help educate kids and people about what's actually going on in our community and just around the world. And I think that's one of the reasons that I stepped up and was like, yeah, I'd love to be a part of this RAND discussion. And
So one of the projects that I haven't talked about yet, we're doing all the things I mentioned and more. One of the things I haven't talked about yet is we have a new project called Change the Course. And it comes out of realizing that there's very much a disconnect between those really working to stop things and those working on solutions. So I don't know that this is the case in Ketchum. I think it's a bit different, but in many of the places where we work, we hear people say, I want to stop a pipeline, I want to stop mountaintop removal, I want to stop a coal mine, I want to stop a coal train, I want to stop whatever it is. And then it's a completely different set of people that are like, I want to do this great thing. I want to have our community go off the grid. We want distributed solar. We want these great things. And we saw it as a very real barrier to the type of change that we need to see. Because it means that we're not using, it would be, since I'm sitting next to an athlete and I kind of think I know how muscles work, it would be like using one of our muscles and then waiting to use the next muscle instead of flexing them both at the same time. And we also realized that we were seeing a lot of folks who weren't sure that we would stabilize the climate. And it's okay to go through that as part of realizing the weight and the gravity of the situation. But it would be a cop-out if we stopped there, right? Because if I stop there because it's a hard fight and I'm tired, that's not great for you. And, it's taking that ownership, and part of that ownership comes from believing that what we're asking for is possible. It's one of the things that I say when we're getting ready as a negotiation team. I'll say never negotiate against yourself. Always go in there with what you need to see happen and then see how far you can get with that. On climate change, oftentimes we're negotiating with ourselves. How much can we ask? Maybe that's too much. Maybe it's never going to happen. So anyway, the project is designed to give people hope and very tangible ways that we can stabilize the climate. And it's built with community-led solutions, many of them that are already there. So we've already reached out to 7,000 people across the country who have done a 2-day workshop where you come in and you imagine the world that we need to see. You build it with your community. So often we're playing a convening role and bringing together lots of partners who haven't known that they've had the opportunity to work with each other. In that re-envisioning, then we get very serious about strategy. And we talk about what are the pillars that are propping up our current kind of running toward the edge in terms of climate change, and what are the pillars that we need to create or we need to prop up in order to see the stabilized climate that meets all of our greatest values and aspirations. From there, we've seen amazing things happen. So part of what we want to do is mobilize people to continue really effective local work. And we're now launching the national digital phase. So you very soon, into February, will be able to go online and check this out. It's a very cool interface. And we want to start bridging different communities that feel like they are isolated in these fights. And then of course, we want to learn from communities and we want to tie this into RAN campaigns. So we'll have different pilot projects that build on the grassroots network all across the country of what people are doing in order to change the way that we're using energy, to change the energy we're doing, to keep fossil fuels in the ground, and to think differently about consumer habits that are driving climate change. So that's changed the course. We also need to stop the Keystone Pipeline. I haven't talked about it, it's big. It's not important just to stop that pipeline, but because we know it's a precedent of taking into account climate for federal decisions. We want to stop forests from falling. We also work on pulp and paper. So we're taking on the fashion industry. Some clothes are made with something called dissolvable pulp, which is nasty, and it comes from trees, and we don't want to be wearing it. So if you go to RAN.org, you can see all of the different fashion brands that we're pushing to stop using forest fiber in their clothes.
Well, as far as that's great. As far as what next for us locally, we, the Ketchum Energy Advisory Committee has been working on some actual goals for our community. I think you guys know we face a lot of risks because we only have a single power line coming up from Haley. And those two power lines actually went, the ones that feed Haley are the two that went down Christmas Eve, so it was actually both lines. So our power system here is pretty vulnerable. And so we're working locally to set some goals. So as far as local leadership, set some goals we're going to be talking about at the next city council meeting on Monday actually, to start talking to you guys about going to 100% renewable energy and 50% local generations. We're actually producing our energy here so that we're resilient and we have a really strong system here locally, and to carbon neutrality so that we're not contributing to global warming. So you guys may not know this, but Idaho Power's power that comes to us, 40% coal right now because it's from out of state, so that's not good. So we want to, it doesn't match our values as a community. Who are we, what do we stand for, what do we value? We all value this environment, natural recreation. So we're going to be working on our plans for how to meet those goals and look forward to working with all of you on those going forward. And I wanted to close with asking a couple folks to talk about what they're up to and their connection to RAN and to this event. And first of all, before I forget, Allie Long, I want to point you out because you guys with the Local Food Alliance and local food work, in addition to our local energy work, I wanted to recognize you guys, make sure that folks knew about you and Idaho's Bounty and others who are probably here, because there's so many people here locally who are doing such great, important work to benefit our economy and to strengthen our resilience. So, there you go. Yes. Oh, Q&A. Sorry. Opening up to Q&A. I was jumping ahead. Q&A. Any questions? Any local, global, RAN, anything? Yes.
Hi, my name's Robin Calderon, and I had a very large organic farm for many years in Washington State and was instrumental in the organic certification program in the country. And over the last 14 years, I spent a lot of time in Italy. And one of the things that I see that happens there is the burning of the vines. It's a small thing, but it's important. The burning of the vines all around Florence, Tuscany, and it's a problem. And I would like to see it stop. And on the other hand, I see the solution, which is, of course, chippers, which the farmers there are not so willing to do because the farming industry there has been going on for so many years in their families. So this is a discussion that I would like to have.
Yeah. So I don't have we're not working in Italy, unfortunately. I would love to get to go to Italy. But, we do see something very similar in the tropics, and so it's slash and burn farming, and oftentimes it is incentivized. So one of the things that we see in Indonesia is that oftentimes pulp and paper companies or palm oil companies in particular that want to come in want to set a new crop and get it established so quickly that instead of harvesting and using the wood that is there to its highest possible value, they're lighting it on fire. And so it's another way that we're seeing these climate impacts. They're draining peatlands, they're lighting it on fire. It's actually created international incidents because some of the burning that was happening in Indonesia was creating smog that was drifting over to Singapore. So if you were hearing about Singapore being furious on the global stage about smog, it was directly related to forests that we were losing and the lungs of the earth that were being burned in order to create the smog that was drifting over. What that did, which might be something to consider, is so one, we moved these corporate campaigns. We want to get the companies to shift the practices on the ground, but we know that we can't go every company at a time. So we need to get enough to a tipping point where it starts to change what companies are asking their governments to do, because it starts to change the relationship. We want to get, in the case of the tropics, we want to get land rights recognized, because oftentimes communities are living there who have been there for centuries and they have protected the forest to date, and so once their land rights get recognized, that's an important step. And then we're also seeing, so you kind of have the corporate layer, the government layer, and then you start to see broader shifts in terms of what the market does. So one of the things that I would suggest, not committing Rand to running on the campaign, even though it would be wonderful, I'm sure, would be to look at who are the decision makers and what would change the financial interests.
With the wine industry.
Exactly.
And the olive oil industry.
Yeah, so once they understand that customers find it unacceptable to be using burning in the way that it's now unacceptable to do slash and burn in Indonesia, that consumer demand can get pushed down the supply chain. So that's that's the model that we use that we found to be really effective. And then you start to see these ripple effects where when you get enough companies that see the value, it can actually shift the behavior.
I think the key is for the consumers to know which of the companies they should be buying one from who aren't doing that and who are. And so thinking about, is the organic or biodynamic certification, which by the way, all the wines here are biodynamic and organic, to see if that's part of their consideration in certifying them and whether it should be. And that way you can know, at least by a label.
Yeah, it's a huge problem.
I have a very general question because I do a lot of volunteer work here in the valley, and I actually have that belief system that you can only change one thing at a time or one animal's life at a time, or it's really difficult to work globally. But I come up with a huge conflict in my computer because the fact is I could sit there and not go out and volunteer, I could just sit there and sign petitions day after day after day. And I never know where my signatures go. Is this really an effective mechanism? Signing petitions?
Yes. So I think it depends on the strategy.
That's a great question.
If you have a good sense of the strategy that is being pushed forward, in terms of if it's an organization and they're saying, listen, we know that emails at this time will matter, then I think it's really worth clicking away. And one of the ways to know is, we do take this really seriously, and people, when people ask, okay, does a company ever really care about a petition? The answer is it depends on the company, and it depends on the moment in time. So, does a governor in Aceh in Indonesia care about saving an ecosystem, when they're thinking about opening up this ecosystem that is home to critically endangered orangutans to be developed for palm oil, does that governor really care? And in our experience, it cares if it's very strategic. In that case, it was strategic because we had partners on the ground in Indonesia. They said the governor is considering this right now. The governor wants to have more of a footing on an international stage coming into the international climate negotiations. So yes, If you demonstrate, if RAND can show that people are paying attention to this relatively small part of the world in Aceh, and all of a sudden is getting petitions in multiple languages, then it matters. And so within 24 hours, we actually got a call from partners saying we now have a meeting with the governor, which had not happened since the governor had come to power. And they said it's because there were so many petitions generated and they weren't expecting it and they were shocked.
But there seems to be a ripple effect that happens. You sign one which you believe in,
Yeah.
and you get 24 that you know nothing about.
Yes. That's called good organizing. So that's all I get. You would be amazed how many people, so I'm sure that we have a lot of folks who say, I'm not going to read the whole thing that RAND sends me, but I know that they do good work and they don't send me stuff that's not important. And so then people will sit there and click it. And so yes, we do actually go in from time to time. We can see the people who are high rate action takers. And sometimes when we have something urgent, we'll call them and say, okay, we know it's not a petition, but we need a phone call today. Will you call Pepsi in the next 10 hours when we're trying to shut down their customer service lines to hear about how their policy is not good enough because they try to just take a baby step? So I would say it depends. It's not a blanket, it always matters, so you don't get to just check that off your list and then go merrily on your way. You should definitely do more, but we try to be really strategic about using
I
it.
think what's really interesting is that you guys are pushing them and pushing them to the table, pushing them to take action, and then they have this incentive if they're a responsible brand and they want a good reputation because they want to be on stage at the UN, they want to be with these government leaders. And I think it's really interesting because at the UN events in September, you had the CEOs of Apple and IKEA there talking about how they're going to 100% renewable energy. And it changed the conversation from climate change is something we have to do and it's important and urgent and it's a moral issue to this is an economic opportunity for our companies to save money. Walmart is the largest buyer of solar, commercial buyer of solar in the country. The Pentagon is the only larger buyer of solar beyond Walmart. So in the United States. So why are they doing it? The long-term contracts for solar to save them money. And so what we're seeing is a change from a thing you have to do and should do and it's for good moral corporate leadership to there's some economic opportunity. So I'm loving that. One of the things we're working on is change that global conversation. This is an opportunity and it's an opportunity for us locally. Right? Others, questions?
I want to thank Andy and Kim for having a vegan array of food tonight. And in relation to that, how is RAND addressing the issue of the consumption of animal products and how it's affecting the environment?
Yeah. So RAND actually started working on a cattle campaign in the Amazon. And it was the very first campaign we ran. It was against Burger King. Burger King was using cows that were raised in the Brazilian Amazon, and they were continuing to spread into the Amazon biome in order to raise cattle. So that's part of our kind of built-in culture where we started. We do have an agribusiness campaign that is, so everything I've been talking about with palm oil is called our agribusiness campaign, but it's pretty specific in terms of where forests are falling. And that's our strength, is to look at agribusiness and forests. So whether it's cattle, soy, palm, which was our big, those were the big three in the agribusiness campaign. That's our greatest campaigning weight. We also talk about the global conversation. So although we don't have campaigns on it every day, we talk about if you want a planet-friendly diet, it means that you're not consuming high levels of animal products because we know that animals have a greater climate impact. And if you're using the same area of land for grazing for a cow, for instance, versus growing a product that can be directly consumed one step to the person consuming it, you're going to have a lower footprint. So I think about it the same way as I think about anything else. When I decide to go to work, I don't drive to work. I live in San Francisco, so it'd be ridiculous, but I don't drive to work. I take public transportation, or if I'm feeling have a lot of nerve, then I might ride my bike. But in that same way, you have 3 times a day at least where you can make a similar decision.
Thank you.
I'm here to learn. I'm learning a lot tonight.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm totally out of my element and I'm learning a lot. I do unplug my plugs all over my house all the time. Because a friend of mine told me a year ago to do that because it saves energy. You speak a lot about Indonesia. I've spent a lot of time in Indonesia. I don't want to. I've been sitting here trying to think about how I'm going to phrase this question. I spent a significant amount of time in Bali and Jakarta, and I've been to a lot of cremations. Does the religious aspect of Indonesian life affect the global, everything we're talking about? And have you addressed that? And if you have you gotten a lot of backlash for that? Because, people are in there, you can't fight, you can fight religion, but it's tough,
Yeah.
because I would think so. I mean, I've been to a lot of cremations in it. Can you talk about that a little bit, please?
I could try. So we haven't worked on cremation specifically. Again, we're kind of looking at the
Because
forest.
it's a huge
intersection.
celebration
Yeah,
in Indonesia.
yeah, it is.
I mean, it's huge.
Yeah, I mean, what we're looking at is really where forest loss and climate and human rights all come together. But we do see, it is a very different culture to work. So when I'm negotiating with an Indonesian company, one of the first negotiations that I did when we really started focusing on Indonesia, I sat between two, 50 and 60-plus-year-old men, and I couldn't get eye contact from the CEO. So, I mean, you do deal with, there are certain cultural norms, many of them based in religion, that are challenging, and we prepare for it in negotiations. So when we saw that happen, we took a break, and I said, okay, you two need to look at me, and any question that's directed to you, please don't answer until they look at me, because we need to establish, the high level to high level relationship in order to get the progress we need to see on the policies. So, when we visit villages, there's different cultural norms that we observe. I dress totally differently, obviously, in order to be culturally and religiously appropriate so that we can have the real content of the conversation happen.
I think it's also that you guys are finding what's that biggest impact. So
Yeah.
what's the sector causing the biggest emissions? And then look at the cultural context
Yeah.
to know, okay, how can we solve this?
Yeah.
And it was, when I was at Google, it's all engineers. So of course, the solution had to be related to technology. But I'm a lawyer and a policy person, so I was like, no, we need to lobby for the California Global Warming Bill. We need to do this. And we did that. But we had to focus on their number one match for their culture. And I think it's really important to think about what's a fit for the local culture, the corporate culture, wherever you are. Next. Yes.
I have a quick question for you, Lindsey. Given your background in social justice and environmental activism, why is it that it was palm oil that really spurred you to get involved with brand?
Yeah. So I had been working on cattle in Brazil because there was another big jump in expansion. There were 75 million head of cattle in the Amazon biome. And we were going after these massive cattle slaughterhouses. You might not know that the U.S. cattle industry is actually being taken over by Brazilian cattle companies. And I expected that to be a 3-year campaign in my life. And there was so much progress happening, and there was such a civil society movement that it moved more quickly. And so then I started looking around, and I wanted to apply some of here's how we get the Goliaths to move more quickly than might be expected. And I was familiar with Rainforest Action Network. I knew that they had a campaign against Cargill. And because of some of my interest in food systems, I kept an eye on Cargill and Monsanto. And so I said, that's what drew me. It was this massive, largest privately held company. Can we get it to do something that it currently doesn't see as being in its interests? And then I also really liked that RAND has a deep commitment to human rights. So we won't kind of green light policies that don't incorporate social issues. In the case of palm oil, there's a huge issue with forced labor that's being used. We helped to break that into a Bloomberg News article that came out a couple years ago as a result of some of the investigations we did with partners on the ground. Social conflict, when these companies kind of steamroll in and clear out the forest, the forests have been inhabited by people for generations, and so they're clearing out communities, primarily indigenous communities, and so indigenous rights is a big part of our values as well. So those are the kind of combination of factors, and then it was palm oil just because palm oil's, Indonesia is the 3rd largest greenhouse gas emitter globally. So US, China, Indonesia, something doesn't fit, right? And it's in a significant amount of those emissions are related to deforestation and the burning And then when we looked at the two greatest drivers of deforestation in Indonesia, you're looking at pulp and paper and palm oil, which are the two campaigns that we're running. For one more?
Yeah, I guess just I was wondering what message would you want to leave maybe through the national media? What is the one principal issue that you would like more people to know about? For both of you, I guess this is for that maybe isn't covered, maybe needs more coverage,
Yeah.
could
I
incite
have a hard
some sort
time
of
picking
change.
my favorite. You're asking for like
Not
my
a
favorite
favorite, but
child.
an issue that isn't covered or that hasn't been
Got
established or it's something that needs more attention.
You want to start or you want me to start?
I think you should go.
Okay. So I would say it's around fashion. And it's really that folks are not thinking about their clothing decisions and the purchases they're making. There's a whole spectrum of action that you can take when you buy products. And of course, one of the pieces of that is related to, as I said, rayon can include forest fiber. And that's related to the human rights abuses and climate change.
So give an
and forest
example of a
calming.
piece of clothing that uses that we might all know here in Syntheticville, USA.
Yeah, the rayon is the most common fabric. Like
So what
lyocell,
piece?
yoga clothes,
Okay.
high likelihood of having dissolving pulp. Dissolving pulp is likely to have, I know, it's the one to whisper about. There's some, go to our website, there's some yoga companies that have not looked at it. And they should, because it's aligned with their values, and they have it called SPACs. I
guess I'll just kind of go off what you said. I would say products, like face products, hair products. It's something that you just tested on animals constantly. Not a lot of people still look at the backs to actually see if it is. And I think that's kind of one of the important things in finding products that are safe for your skin and your body is, I think, something that's really important because you're putting them on every single day, and a lot of people don't know the chemicals that you are actually putting on your skin and that are seeping into your bloodstream. And so I think that's one of the scariest things, kind of.
And there's great local resources for those products at Nourish Me. I know that she carries a lot of stuff and makes sure that nothing on her shelves is toxic. And I think what's interesting when you're talking about testing on animals or you're talking about slave labor, when you find a company doing something and not taking responsibility for their supply chain, there's oftentimes a lot of other bad things going on in that company or in their supply chain, and that's investor risk, that's corporate risk, because they're going to be sued, they're going to be called out, their financials, they're not planning for the future, they're not planning for when they're going to have to pay for their climate change emissions when we actually have regulation that causes us to pay for that pollution. And so the smart companies to buy from and to invest in are the ones who are being responsible in one area, because then often they're being responsible across multiple areas. So no matter what you care about, if you know they're doing on one thing, they're probably being responsible much more broadly across the board, and vice versa. I don't know if you knew, but there's a lot of slave labor in the fisheries industry, and so if you're buying illegally caught fish, they're usually slave labor. So it's pretty scary what's going on when they're not being responsible. So, I think that's it for Q&A, but we're going to mingle afterward. I did have a couple of folks who wanted to make a couple remarks real quickly. We have Muffy Ritz, first of all. Muffy.
Why am I here and why do I support RAN? It's my second year helping support this evening. And first of all, I think of two things most important. RAN is run by young people. Can you see Lindsey here? Okay. Okay, a lot of us in the room are not quite that young. But I feel like the youth in our country and the world are really driving forces. Yes. We love to hear them, we love to see what they're doing, and we love to back them. So I just feel that the youth of our country is doing a great thing. So thank you, Lindsey, just for pulling this. Second of all, I feel that RAN is David and all those big companies out there, Goliath. They have actually gone up against Disney and had Disney not produce paper from the rainforest. Disney's huge. You know how much paper they produce? A lot. They've gone against Pepsi and gone with all these different companies that Pepsi is involved with for them not to produce palm oil. And close to my heart, believe it or not, is Cargill. I'm from Minnesota. I can do my Minnesota accent if I really want to.
Yeah, sure.
I'm from a town called Wayzata, Minnesota. There's a family called the Cargill McMillans. I've been friends with them all my life, the McMillans. I played with Kate McMillan. My brother played with David McMillan. Cargill McMillan, the family is a big family, and it's the largest privately owned company in the world. And Rand, David, has gone up against Goliath Cargill and actually has made a huge difference. I can't say they've won. They didn't bring Cargill down, but they have caused Cargill to change their mindset. And that's huge. I am just so blown away by that whole fact. So thank you. And anyway, I think that we can do something as a community here. Support these guys, Rand, support Kaitlyn and her pal. I'm not a fundraiser, I'm a horrible fundraiser. But if anybody wants to help these guys support their cause, these guys are good. Okay?
And Sienna and any other students who wanted to just say a few words about why you're here and what you're working on. Community school.
So, 2 years ago, I got invited to this event. Just someone had an extra ticket, and I came here. And I took my daughter Sarah and Sienna with me just because there was 3 extra tickets, and they tagged along. And it was one of the best nights that I had been to, and I actually hadn't heard about RAN. And it was really inspiring. I worked with kids my entire life, and I see the world and what needs to get done, and then I see what young women, they were all like last year, all young women on the list as well. And I was like, that's going to be my students. Yeah, that's going to be my, and I wanted them to see what's possible. I also feel like, there's this quote by Edward Abbey, which is, "Sentiment without action is ruin of the soul." And I always feel that way. Like, if I'm not doing what I can do, knowing what's out there, I feel bad about that. But I also know that I can only do so much. And one really important part is to invest whatever funds you can into people who are devoting their lives to tackling the problems on a bigger level. Because the problems can't be solved just locally and just by doing small actions. Though I do, Kaitlyn, completely agree with what you're saying and want you to come to our school. So I don't discount that, but I also know we need RAN. We need them taking on the big corporations. And I love the fact that I can bring some students here who can come back and go, that was so cool. And Sienna, I think, is going to talk a little bit about the way she felt and why she was so excited about coming back here.
Yeah, kind of along those same lines. Last year I was really inspired by the talk. I learned a lot, and it's cool to see that there's people in the larger community that are working on the same types of things that we are at school, and it's just exciting to kind of see where this sort of effort can take students, because I think it's important to know that we're practicing now and then we can move on to the bigger things later, but it's exciting to be hearing from people.
Awesome.
Thanks, you guys. I just want to note that one thing what wasn't asked that often is asked is, what about Sun Valley Company? How are we engaging one of our major local economic players? And one of the things that I'm the most excited about is connecting with Kaitlyn and with the students from community school, who, by the way, didn't talk at all what they're doing, but they're doing incredible energy and climate and water programs and and landscaping efforts, and really the whole sustainability team you guys are driving is amazing. But what I'm most excited about is that we're all going to go and engage Sun Valley companies, Sun Valley City Council, and really have these conversations, and these are the voices that have that moral call to action. So thank you. That's one of our most exciting takeaways from connecting to each other as a result of RAN. So thank you.